A Norse writer who knew Eric Bloodaxe praised his lord's generosity to followers, but added that Eric was a very hard man who ruled with a fist of iron. When you stood before him in his great royal hall and he gazed upon you, you felt fear. Though the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and Life of Saint Cathro both mention Eric Haraldsson's life at York, his saga does not survive today, so our knowledge of his life in Norway relies exclusively on the erratic sagas, written much later. Thus they are heavily influenced by later political events and should be treated with caution as actual historical accounts. While the sagas call him Bloodaxe, one of the Latin texts calls him Fratris Interfector, brother killer, so it seems likely that blood in this context refers to family and killing. Alternatively, his epithet is due to his fanatical battle bravery whilst raiding. At the age of 12, Eric was given 5 longships by his polygamous father, King Harald Fairhair, the first king of Norway, and raided the coasts of Denmark, Friesland, and Saxland for 3 years. He then sailed to the west, and raided Scotland and the area around the Irish Sea for 4 years. Modern historians now agree that Eric's dying father elevated Eric to kingship late in his reign, according to Norse tradition. But after the old king's death in 934, Harald's kingdom was in revolt. It not large enough for the inheritance of so many of his sons, perhaps as many as 14, and Eric tried to gain the whole of Norway for himself by gradually murdering most of his half-brothers in turn. Such was Eric's despotic and brutal reign that he fell out with the Norse nobility. According to Theodoricus, they invited Eric's most famous brother, Hakon, to sail from England, where he was King Athelstan's foster son, and become Norse king in Eric's place. Eric fled Norway in 934 with ardent retainers and family. But to where? Plundering Spain, Russia, Ireland, or Britain's coasts. Later sagas state he landed at Orkney. Maybe he knew of York and events there from merchants and traders as he plundered? In the sagas, poet and warrior Snorri Sturluson said,
Athelstan, the King of England, sent a message to Eric offering him dominions under him in England, saying that King Harald, his father, was a good friend of King Athelstan, and therefore he would do kindly towards his sons. Messengers passed between the two kings, and it came to an agreement that King Eric should take Northumberland as a fief from King Athelstan, and which land he should defend against the Danes or other Vikings. Eric should let himself be baptized, together with his wife Gunhild and their children, and all the people who had followed him. Eric accepted this offer and was baptized and adopted the right faith.
But why would Athelstan want to reward Eric, an enemy of Hakon, his elder half-brother? The Kingdom of Northumbria provided a useful buffer zone for both kings Athelstan of England and Malcolm of the Scots, and both were anxious for it to be controlled by their own allies. In this context, the appointment of Eric as sub-king would make perfect sense. What is certainly clear is that Northumbria changed hands frequently during the 940s, as different factions tried to control the kingdom. Soon after Athelstan's death in late 939, the kingdom was seized by Norseman Olaf Guthfrithson of Dublin, and thereafter the kingdom was contested between Athelstan's successor kings Edmund and Edred on the one side, and kings of the Dublin Viking dynasty on the other. While both the Anglo-Saxon and the saga accounts agree that, after Athelstan's death, Eric was acting on his own account, rather than as a sub-king for the Wessex dynasty. Coins of basically Anglo-Saxon type with the inscription Eric Rex would tally with Eric's role as a licensed sub-king. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which does not mention Eric in England before 947, and various Irish chronicles, Eric was taken as king by the Northumbrians in 947 or 948, some years after Athelstan's death in 939, and in defiance of Athelstan's younger brother and successor, Edred. Certainly the saga tradition is confused on some points. It places Eric's death in the reign of Edmund, who ruled between Athelstan and Edred, and does not recognize the existence of Edred at all. When Edred succeeded to the throne in 946 after the murder of his brother Edmund, Northumbrian as well as Scottish loyalties had proved unstable. Edred
reduced all the land of Northumbria to his control, and the Scots granted him oaths that they would do all that he wanted.
To affirm his dominance, in 947 Edred then convened Archbishop Wulfstan and the Northumbrian Witan on the boundary of the Humber, where they pledged their obedience to him. What perceived threat was being countered remains unclear, but southern English rule does not seem to have been very warmly received by the northerners. In the summer of 948, the troublesome exiled Norse prince, fresh from raiding and recruiting soldiers, exploded onto the scene at York and was soon welcomed as king by the leading magnates and local populace who betrayed their recent allegiance to English King Edred, especially the mighty Archbishop Wulfstan, an inveterate northern separatist. An enraged King Edred led a mounted army into Northumbria and violently devastated the region, sacking Ripon, a symbol of Northumbrian independence and patronized by wealthy Viking supporters of Eric, and its church, arresting and torturing suspects. On Edred's return south as he reached a ford over the River Aire at Castleford, Eric ambushed and slaughtered the king's rearguard. Edred was furious and threatened dire things against the region if Eric was not ousted. Thus the panicking York magnates reluctantly ousted Eric from York, whilst Edred received huge tribute for the loss of noble life by the ambush. Late in the year Eric sailed off via the River Humber, maybe northwards to his old looting grounds in the Orkneys, around Britain or the thriving slave markets of Rouen and southern Spain to gain Arabic silver with which to pay his loyal followers. The power vacuum at York was soon filled. Because of the uncertainty in the northeast, King Malcolm of Scotland raided England as far south as the Tees, with his ally, Olaf Sitrickson, and they took York, which the latter held for 3 years. King Edred in the south had ruled York directly, and allowed a now compliant Olaf to rule as sub-king in Eric's place. Perhaps it was he that was pulling Olaf's strings and not Malcolm? Unfortunately, the critical period between 950 and 954 has produced comparatively few charters, owing perhaps to Edred's deteriorating health, but what little there is may be instructive. Wulfstan is still seen at court in 950, but of the 5 charters which were issued in 951, not one was attested by him, which may imply his backing of Olaf. The absence of such a powerful churchman from Athelstan's court in these years suggests, perhaps, that Northumbria was not quite as securely in the king's hands as it had been prior to the English victory over the Scots and Vikings at the Battle of Brunanburh in 937. But maybe Olaf was too compliant for most independent-minded northerners, as he was readily expelled in late 952 by the arrival of a familiar face. The northern kingdom was rocked by a violent battle in Northumbria. The annals of Ulster records a great battle being fought, of Norsemen defeating an alliance of Northumbrians, Strathclyde Britons, and nominal armies of Kings Edred and the dying King Malcolm, who sent his cousin, Indulf. The York men, especially Wulfstan, then in his 60s, quickly capitulated to popularly make Eric king again. Manuscript E of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says,
"This year the Northumbrians expelled King Olaf and received Eric, the son of Harald, as king."
Edred was furious, and caught fingers pointed at Wulfstan. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle reports that Edred
ordered Archbishop of York Wulfstan to be brought into prison at Jedburgh, because he was often accused before the king.
It seems clear that in Eric's brief first period of rule 947 to 948 he lacked the force to maintain his position in the face of opposition from Northumbria, Dublin, and Wessex. But Eric now began striking blatantly independent and militant coinage, brazenly displaying a sword, thus defying the Wessex king. While the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle states that Eric was periodically driven out by rivals, the sagas tell us that Northumbria was not wealthy enough to support Eric and his following. Hence his constant raiding for lucrative slaves in and around the British Isles and Irish Sea. Orkneyinga saga indicates that Eric was short of land and funds. He continued to plunder during the summers, venturing to Orkney, the Hebrides, Ireland, and Strathclyde. Thus, Eric had made bitter enemies over the years. He had fought or threatened them, taken York, raided in their territories, refused to be a mere English vassal, and had disrupted their trading routes. And so, in 954 something went disastrously wrong for Eric. Sadly, we don't know the exact details of what followed, but for some unknown reason Eric was again expelled by the Northumbrians, now minus the powerful support of the mighty Archbishop Wulfstan, who was by now under English arrest in the south. Instead of sailing out of the River Humber again, as before, Eric led a huge army of 5 kings overland across the lonely, desolate Stainmoor in a northwest direction, possibly heading for the only major town there, Carlisle. But why? We perhaps will never know. Cumbria had had Norse settlements for decades. Maybe Eric was seeking supporters? Or a new kingdom? Maybe he was lured there under false pretenses? The fact that he didn't sail away from York via the River Humber, and that he took a huge army with him, suggests a threat or a challenge. The ambush and the treachery mentioned in the sources suggest that someone might have acted as a guide for Eric through Earl Osolf's lands by permission, then turned upon him. But on the way there, a certain Earl Maccus ambushed the Norsemen, and Eric was treacherously slain, say the sagas, whose sympathies are obvious.
King Eric had so great an army that 5 kings followed him, because he was a valiant man and a battle winner. And he trusted in himself and his force so much that he went deep up country. And there a tributary king of King Edred came against him, and a dreadful battle ensued. Many of the English fell, but for every one who fell, 3 came in his place out of the countryside around. And as the evening came on, the loss of men turned against the Norsemen, and many were killed. And there fell Eric with his sons and brothers, and all his army. Our last day has dawned. By the head of my dead leader I will die cut down. So whosoever gazes on the pile of our corpses may see how we repaid our Lord for all the gold he gave us. Thus it is right that the chief warriors should be undismayed and fall embracing their illustrious king in companionship.
After these events, Archbishop Wulfstan was released and given a southern see, reinstated as Dorchester Bishop, though he died in the south of England in 956, a virtual prisoner and an embittered man. Eric's Christian followers at York honoured his memory with an Anglo-Saxon cross, now a faded stump by the side of the old Roman road, today's A66, which cuts through Stainmoor. As for Eric's wife Gunhild, she commissioned a poem envisioning Eric entering pagan Valhalla as an honoured warrior meeting the gods and dining with Odin, his fresh battle wounds displayed.
Hail, Eric, welcome, coming to the hall, brave hero. We know you well, and your famous deeds.